I'm going to go over lesson 3, the prophets. Here we go. Okay, so in lesson 2, we were talking about Moses and the 10 Commandments. And so we're moving on from Moses, the time of Moses now. And so Moses is in the desert. He gets the 10 Commandments. And eventually, everyone kind of, the Hebrew people start calling themselves Israelites. And so Israelites are Hebrew people. Hebrew people are Israelites. It's more like Hebrew people is the people group, and Israelites is once the name they give themselves once they start referring to themselves as kind of like a nation. So they break up into 12 separate tribes after Moses. And that's mostly just because they are, living in different areas. And so the 12 tribes all have like a kind of like a leader, and they are just kind of 12 family groups essentially that are splitting up into different areas. And eventually all of these 12 tribes are united under a single king, King David. And this comes after some battles with the Canaanites, who were another group of people living in the area. They're battling Canaanites. There's the famous story, David and Goliath. That is David beating, a Canaanite. And he unites these 12 tribes under one kind of nation state. And so he unites all 12 tribes and brings peace to the kingdom. And he built Jerusalem, the capital. This is King David. He's known for being a talented musician and a poet. He wrote many of the Psalms, which is another book in the Old Testament. There's an example of the Psalms in the PDF reading of this. And he, this kingdom, he unified all 12 tribes into the kingdom that was known as Israel. Okay, so this is Israel now. Once they're all the Israelites, they're in Israel, they're all united. And then comes along King Solomon, is after King David. He's another prominent figure throughout the stories of the Bible, and he is the son of King David. He brought great wealth to the kingdom of Israel, and he is known for building the temple in Jerusalem. So the main temple in the Jerusalem, this is the temple that people still talk about in Jerusalem today when they're referring to like the temple. It's that started with that original temple. So after the death of King Solomon, the kingdom of Israel kind of starts to fall apart over time. So after he dies, the kingdom first splits in half. So it's, it was kind of like maybe an oval shape to simplify it. Here, like it's like the kingdom would be like an oval shape, right? And it splits in half. And so the kind of the top half of the kingdom is called Judah, and the bottom half is called Israel. And so the Israelites faced economic and territorial troubles with their neighboring kingdoms. So there's still kingdoms all around, and they are kind of fighting with them all the time. Throughout this time, there were prophets, and so prophets are someone who is inspired by God. They were believed to be teachers of God. Two major prophets that the text talks about are Amos and Isaiah, and they saw how the Israelites had lost their faith in covenant and God, and they warned the Israelites that if they didn't change, all of these disasters would continue to happen. So as the kind of kingdom was falling apart, they had all these economic troubles. They were constantly battling and having wars with everyone around them. And so the prophets were traveling around trying to convince Israelites to change their ways and follow the 10 Commandments and the teachings of the Torah, because they felt that all of these wars and battles and economic troubles were all God's punishment for basically not following the commandments and stuff like that. So over time, Israel fell under the control of other empires. So, there were large empires forming around Israel. Israel is pretty small. If you look at it at a map, it's tiny. And so under many years, the capital of Jerusalem was captured by the Babylonians. Before that, about 150 years before Jerusalem and Israel was captured, the Assyrians captured Judah and the northern kingdom of Judah. And then eventually those, after they were conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians actually destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And then, much later than that, even then the Greeks took over, and then the Romans took over the time. So the land, right, Jerusalem and that kind of area has been taken over a lot of times. And under Roman rule, particularly, the Israelites suffered a lot because, as we've talked about before, the Romans would persecute everyone they took over in order for them to follow their ways and believe in the Roman gods and pay taxes and do all that stuff. So throughout all of this time being kind of taken over by other nations and being in constant wars and just in general being, downtrodden, the prophets continued to be kind of a symbol of hope. So prophets often would speak of a future Messiah. The Messiah is an agent of God. The Messiah, like when we're talking about Messiahs in terms of for the Israelites in Judaism, the Messiah was an agent of God who would come and set things right for God's people. And so after being controlled for so long, the Israelites believed, because of the stories the prophets would tell and all of these, these prophets' teachings, they came to believe that the Messiah was going to come soon and would save them. And that brings us to the next lesson, which is going to be on Jesus. But this idea of before we get to Jesus, it's important to know kind of the backdrop of him was that you had these states, and the Israelites had been kind of enduring hundreds of years, thousands of years even, of kind of being taken over by a bunch of other empires, and that you had prophets all throughout the history of them speaking of a Messiah who would come and basically make everything right for them. So that's it.